All right, so hello everyone. We're going to present our large database and analysis on the association between BMI and mortality among Asian Americans. We're STANMONTIEGO, my name is Nyan, and I'm here today with my teammates Amin and Gad. Body mass index or BMI is a measure of body fat based on your weight in relation to your height. It's calculated by dividing a person's mass by the square of their height. And this value is used to screen for weight categories that may be at higher risks of developing health problems. Although the prevalence of overweight or obesity is twice as lower in Asian Americans, the Asian American population was found to be at very high risk of developing weight-related diseases such as cardiovascular disease, hypertension, and diabetes. As such, the World Health Organization, or the WHO, has recommended lower BMI cutoffs for Asians to improve weight-related disease screening in that population. Saying that all Asian Americans are at high risk of developing weight-related diseases is not entirely true, and I'll show you why with an example. If we look at the prevalence of diabetes in Asian Americans here, we would think that Asian Americans are not as affected by type 2 diabetes as other races or ethnicities. However, when we look at this issue with disaggregated Asian American groups, we can truly appreciate the heterogeneity of Asian Americans. While Vietnamese individuals have a lower prevalence of type 2 diabetes, the prevalence are higher for all other Asian subgroups and has actually a wide range from 1.3 times as high in Chinese individuals to 4 times as high in Filipinos compared to non-Hispanic whites. Using WHO BMI categories, a U-shaped relationship between BMI and mortality has generally been found in most studies on the American population. This means that individuals within the underweight and the obese category had higher mortality rates. And one study specifically looked at Asian Americans and found a linear relationship instead of the U-shape, as you can see on the right. With a lack of literature using Asian BMI categories and a clear need for disaggregation of Asian American groups, our study is the next logical step. Our research question is then the following. Using WHO and Asian BMI categories, is there a difference in the association between BMI and mortality rates among Asian Americans overall and subgroups compared to non-Hispanic whites and non-Hispanic Blacks from 1999 to 2018?
In seeking to answer this question, we conducted an observational cross-sectional study looking at the National Health Interview Survey, or NHIS, which is an annual survey providing information about the American population's demographics and health status, and linking that to the National Vital Statistics System mortality data, or NVSS, which provides data on mortality status. Linking both data sets allowed us to determine the individual's demographics and health status and whether they were alive or deceased. We chose to include data from the years 1999 to 2018 as the NHIS began oversampling Asian Americans from 1997, but other Asians and Pacific Islanders were aggregated into one category in 1997 and 1998. 2018 was chosen as the upper cutoff year because disaggregated ethnic subgroups were no longer included in subsequent versions of the NHIS. Our inclusion criteria were individuals who were over 18 years of age, had available mortality data, were Asian Indian, Filipino, Chinese, non-Hispanic white, and non-Hispanic Black. And after applying these criteria, we were left with a sample size of 560,034 individuals. Our variables of interest included BMI, WHO BMI categories, and Asian American BMI categories. We then used RStudio to analyze our sample through univariate and bivariate analyses to look at the proportions of BMI classifications by race and by ethnicity. We further conducted Poisson regression to examine the mortality rates at different BMI cutoffs by race and ethnicity. Here are some findings which show much higher crude mortality rates in the underweight category among all groups. We also found no increase in the crude mortality rates in the obese category among all groups, and no difference in crude mortality trends using the WHO BMI cutoff points or the Asian Pacific BMI cutoff points. But we'll need age-adjusted rates to have a more representative picture, as we know that different demographics can have different age distributions. And after adjusting for age, the portrait indeed changes significantly. In general, people who were underweight had higher age-adjusted mortality compared with other BMI categories, regardless of the choice of cut points. Asian Indians in the underweight category had significantly higher age-adjusted mortality rates relative to other races and ethnic groups. And when comparing age-adjusted mortality rates between WHO and BMI cutoffs for Asian Americans, mortality rates for the obese Asian BMI categories were significantly lower for all Asian American groups. We found that the WHO cutoff points at left provided, similar to most studies examining the BMI and mortality relationship, a U-shaped association, whereas the Asian American cutoff points show us a J-shaped association, or higher mortality rates in the underweight categories and lower in obese categories. The unmasking of these differences has clinical impacts as it points to the patterns being more consistent and standardized to the overall population and the reference populations of non-Hispanic whites and non-Hispanic Black individuals.
Our study does pose some limitations. For example, social desirability bias is present with the self-reported items found in the NHIS. Undesirable attitudes may have been underreported and desirable attitudes overreported, which could lead to skewed data. The surveys were also conducted only in English and Spanish, which excludes individuals who aren't fluent in that language. Lastly, only 4 Asian subgroups were studied, with all other Asians being aggregated into a category called Other Asian. This leaves a group of Asians being aggregated and not disaggregated. It is important to note that despite these limitations, the study uses a nationally representative survey using a national death index, and there are no other comprehensive studies investigating mortality by Asian American subgroups. The key takeaways from our research so far are that when using Asian BMI categories, we start seeing a different portrait for Asian American subgroups, as Amin had previously mentioned with the J-shaped association. Continued exploration of more appropriate measures is also needed to improve treatment and health outcomes for Asian Americans. A few potential measures that have yielded some promising results include the lean mass index, waist circumference, and body fat percentage. Moving forward, we'll be performing sensitivity analysis on variables such as body fat percentage and waist circumference. We'll also be performing a spline regression analysis to further investigate the association between different BMI cutoffs and mortality in Asian American subgroups. Lastly, we want to take the time to acknowledge our mentors, Dr. Alfasi and Dr. Yang, as well as Dr. Kim, our statistician, Dr. Bakong, and then Dr. Srinivasan, Dr. Huang, Dr. Palanyappan, Dr. Sana Vora, Tina Chang, Armand Jamal, Karina Kim, and then lastly, all the care scholars for the enticing and really groundbreaking and great conversations that we've had throughout the summer. And we'll take any questions that you have at the moment.